The wind screamed through the mountain pass like a living thing, cruel and hungry. Nessa Thorwood pressed her son closer to her chest, feeling his small body trembling beneath the threadbare wool blanket that had once been her wedding shawl. Finn's lips had turned the color of winter violets, and his breathing came in shallow, stuttered gasps that tore at her heart with each sound. "Mama," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the howling storm. "Are we going to the warm place now?" Nessa's throat constricted. She had been telling him stories about a warm place for 3 days now, ever since they'd been cast out from Thornwick Village. A place where fires never died and blankets were thick as clouds. A place where little boys didn't shake with cold. That came from inside their bones, where mothers didn't have to watch their children suffer from a condition no one understood. "Soon, my little sparrow," she murmured against his frost-white hair, though she knew it was a lie. Her legs had stopped obeying her will a mile back. Her feet, wrapped in rags inside her broken boots, had lost all feeling. The storm had erased any trace of the path she'd been following, and night was falling fast over the Wraith Peak Mountains. She stumbled, catching herself against a snow-covered boulder. The impact sent shooting pain through her shoulder, but she barely felt it. Everything hurt now, a dull, pervasive ache that had become her constant companion. She looked down at Finn, at his pale face and the blue-tinged shadows under his closed eyes, and felt something inside her crack. This wasn't supposed to be how their story ended. 6 months ago, she'd been Nessa Thornwood, respected herbalist of Thornwick, wife of Thomas the Miner, mother to a bright-eyed boy who loved to chase butterflies through the meadow grasses. Her cottage had always smelled of drying lavender and chamomile, and people came from neighboring villages to buy her remedies and salves. Then Thomas had died, crushed in a tunnel collapse along with 7 other men. The same day, Finn had collapsed during his father's funeral, his small body convulsing with cold, despite the summer heat. The village healer had examined him and declared it a curse, a punishment for some unnamed sin. Nessa had fought the diagnosis. She'd spent every waking hour researching, experimenting, trying to understand the condition that made her son's body unable to regulate its own warmth. She'd discovered he needed constant heat, careful monitoring, specific herbs that helped his circulation. She'd been managing it, keeping him alive, keeping him comfortable, but the village had other ideas. Elder Matthias, who had always disapproved of her independence, her education, her refusal to remarry quickly after Thomas's death, had called a council. A widow who couldn't keep her child healthy was a burden, he declared. A woman who practiced herb craft without a husband's guidance was dangerous. A boy with a curse would bring misfortune to them all. They'd given her 3 days to leave. Her own sister, Kara, had stood silent in the crowd, eyes averted. Nessa had packed what little she could carry, wrapped Finn in every warm thing she owned, and walked away from the only home she'd ever known. She'd been heading for Millbrook, a larger town 2 days' journey through the mountains, where she'd heard there was a teaching hospital, where someone might be able to help Finn, or at least understand his condition. She'd been a fool to think she could make it through the pass before winter's first storm. Her knees buckled, and this time she couldn't stop herself from falling. She twisted as she went down, landing on her side in the deep snow, Finn still clutched against her chest. The cold embraced them both, seeping through her clothes, stealing what little warmth remained. "Mama?" Finn's eyes opened, unfocused and glassy. "I'm so cold. I know, baby, I know." Tears froze on her cheeks as she pulled the blanket tighter around him, curled her body around his like a shield. "Just close your eyes. Dream about the warm place. Dream about sunshine and summer, and—" Her voice trailed off. She was so tired. The wind didn't seem so loud anymore, or maybe her ears were just too frozen to hear it properly. The snow beneath her almost felt soft, welcoming. Her eyes drifted closed, She thought of Thomas, wondered if she would see him soon, wondered if he would forgive her for not being strong enough to save their son. She thought of her garden, of the rosemary that would be blooming now in someone else's care. She thought of all the things she would never teach Finn, all the butterflies he would never chase. "I'm sorry," she whispered into his hair. "I'm so sorry, my darling boy." Finn's small hand found hers beneath the blanket, his fingers ice cold and fragile. "Don't be sad, Mama." "I'm not scared." That broke her. A sob caught in her chest, but she was too cold to release it. She pulled him impossibly closer, pressed her lips to his forehead, and let the darkness creep in at the edges of her vision. Somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard something, a sound that didn't belong to the wind or the mountain. But it was probably just her mind playing tricks, offering false hope in the final moments. She let her eyes close completely, let her breathing slow to match Finn's shallow rhythm. If they were going to die, at least they would die together. At least her son wouldn't be alone. At least she could give him that much. The snow continued to fall, gentle now, covering them like a blanket. The storm's fury seemed to ease, as if even the mountain had decided to grant them this small mercy. The cold wrapped around them both, pulling them down into darkness. Nessa's last conscious thought was a prayer, not to the gods of her village who had abandoned them, but to the mountain itself, to the wild, indifferent wilderness that at least made no pretense of caring. She prayed that it would be quick, that Finn wouldn't suffer, that somewhere beyond this frozen darkness there was warmth waiting, and she felt nothing at all. Rowan Blackheart had learned to trust his instincts in the 5 years since he'd retreated to the old watchtower. Those instincts had kept him alive through harsh winters, equipment failures, and the crushing weight of memories he couldn't escape. So when something made him look up from his forge that evening, made him step out into the howling storm, despite every rational thought screaming at him to stay inside, he didn't question it. He'd been working on a commission, a set of door hinges, for a merchant in Millbrook who paid well and asked no questions about why a master blacksmith had chosen to live alone in an abandoned military outpost. The work was meditative, the rhythmic hammer strikes drowning out thoughts of Helena, of the life he'd lost, of the man he used to be. But something had pulled him away from the forge. A feeling, a compulsion. The wind hit him like a physical blow as he stepped outside, his heavy leather coat whipping around his legs. Snow stung his face, and visibility was nearly zero. This was madness. He should go back inside, return to his work, his solitude, his carefully constructed isolation. Instead, he grabbed his storm lantern and started walking. The watchtower sat on a rocky outcropping overlooking the mountain pass, positioned to give early warning of approaching armies in a war that had ended decades ago. Rowan had chosen it precisely because it was remote, defensible, and thoroughly forgotten by the world. The nearest village was Thornwick, half a day's journey east, and he made the trip only once a month for supplies, speaking to no one more than necessary. He'd been a different man before Helena died. Gregarious, passionate, quick to laugh, and quicker to love. They'd run a forge together in the capital city of Ashenmere, creating everything from decorative ironwork to custom weapons for the nobility. Their workshop had been full of life, full of plans, full of future, and the fever had come. The same fever that swept through the lower districts, killing hundreds. Helena had been helping at the charity hospital, using her gift for organization to coordinate care for the sick. She'd caught it there, and despite every physician, every medicine, every desperate prayer Rowan had offered, she died within a week. He'd closed the forge the day after her funeral, sold everything, walked away from the city and everyone in it. The tower had been his refuge, his prison, his penance for surviving when she hadn't. The wind shifted, and Rowan caught sight of something dark against the white landscape. A shape, too regular to be natural. His heart began to pound. He moved faster, his boots crunching through the deepening snow. As he drew closer, his lantern light revealed what his instincts had somehow known was there. Two figures, half buried in a drift. A woman curled around a child, motionless, frosted with ice. "No," he breathed, breaking into a run. "No, no, no." He dropped to his knees beside them, his hands already moving, checking for signs of life even as his mind catalogued the severity of their condition. The woman's skin was pale as marble, her lips blue, her breathing so shallow he could barely detect it. The child in her arms was worse, his small chest barely moving, his face slack with unconsciousness. For a paralyzed moment, Rowan was back in Helena's sick room, watching her slip away, helpless despite all his strength and skill. The memory threatened to freeze him more thoroughly than any winter storm. Then the child's hand twitched, and something in Rowan's chest cracked open. He tore off his coat, wrapping it around both of them. The woman was thin, far too thin, and the child felt like he weighed nothing at all. Rowan lifted them both, grunting, with the effort not because they were heavy, but because his heart was pounding so hard he could barely breathe. "Hold on," he muttered, starting back toward the tower. "Just hold on. I've got you." The journey back felt endless. The wind fought him for every step, and his arms began to shake with effort and adrenaline. He talked to them the whole way, a steady stream of words he wasn't sure they could hear. "Almost there. You're going to be fine, both of you. I've got heating coils, medical supplies. You'll be warm soon. Just hold on." The tower's door had never looked so welcoming. He shouldered through it, kicked it shut behind him, and carried them straight to the main living area, where the forge's residual heat kept the space warm, even in the worst weather. He laid them on the thick fur rug near the forge, and moved with frantic efficiency. He'd learned field medicine in his younger years, when he'd served a brief stint in the territorial militia. He'd never forgotten the training, though he'd prayed he'd never need to use it again. Heat first. He stoked the forge higher, hung thermal blankets on a rack to warm them, activated the floor heating system he'd rigged through salvaged pipes. Then he turned to his patients. The child first. That was triage. The smallest, the weakest, the most vulnerable. Rowan's hands trembled as he unwrapped the boy from the frozen blanket, revealing a face that was too pale, too still. He rubbed the boy's limbs gently, stimulating circulation, and wrapped him in pre-warmed blankets and positioned him near the forge's radiant heat. The boy's eyes flickered open briefly, unfocused and confused. "Mama," he whispered. "She's right here," Rowan said, his voice rough. "She's safe. You're both safe." He turned to the woman. She was still unconscious, her breathing dangerously shallow. Hypothermia, severe dehydration, probable exhaustion. He removed her wet outer clothes with clinical efficiency, trying not to notice how her wedding ring caught the firelight, trying not to think about how Helena's hands had looked in repose. He wrapped her in warm blankets, positioned her near the heat source, then prepared warm fluids. Not too hot, never too hot. That could send someone into shock. The next hours blurred together. Rowan moved between his two unexpected guests, monitoring their breathing, their color, their responses. He coaxed warm broth between the boy's lips, drop by careful drop. He checked the woman's pulse every few minutes, willing it to grow stronger. Somewhere around midnight, the boy began to shiver. Rowan nearly wept with relief. Shivering meant the body was trying to regulate its temperature, meant there was still fight left in him. "That's it," he murmured, adjusting the blankets. "Come back." The boy's eyes opened more fully this time, and they focused on Rowan's face. There was confusion there, but also something else. A kind of wondering trust that made Rowan's chest ache. "You're not a dream," the boy whispered. "No, son, I'm real. You're in my home. You're safe now. Are you an angel?" Rowan's laugh came out half as a sob. No, definitely not. I'm just someone who found you in the snow. The boy considered this, his eyes already drifting closed again. Mama says, angels are just people who choose to be kind. The words hit Rowan like a hammer strike to the chest. He looked at the unconscious woman, at the protective curve of her body, even in sleep, at the worn fabric of her dress and the calluses on her hands. She'd been carrying this child through a blizzard. She'd been dying, and still, she'd held him close. Helena had been like that, fierce in her love, unwavering in her compassion. She would have done the same. The boy's breathing evened out into genuine sleep, deeper and more stable than before. Rowan sat back on his heels, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was, how his hands were shaking, how his face was wet with tears he didn't remember shedding. He looked around his tower, at the space that had been his solitary refuge for 5 years, the forge that had been his only companion, the silence that had been his penance. And now, these two fragile lives that had stumbled into his isolation, demanding that he be something more than a ghost haunting his own existence. Damn it. He whispered to the empty air, to Helena's memory, to whatever force had compelled him into that storm. Damn it. But he stood, checked their vital signs again, added more wood to the forge, and settled in to keep watch through the night. Because whatever else he'd become in his grief, he wasn't a man who let people die when he could save them. The woman stirred as dawn light began to filter through the tower's high windows. Her breathing hitched, and her eyes moved rapidly beneath closed lids. Rowan leaned forward, watching as consciousness slowly returned to her. When her eyes finally opened, they were the color of honey in sunlight, and they held depths of pain and fierce determination that he recognized all too well. She looked at him, at the unfamiliar surroundings, and then her gaze found the sleeping child beside her. Her hand reached out, trembling, to touch the boy's face. "He's alive," Rowan said softly. "You both are." She turned those eyes back to him, and he saw her trying to speak, her lips forming words that wouldn't come. He reached for a cup of water, held it to her lips. "Easy," he said. "Small sips." She drank, coughed, drank again. Then, in a voice like rustling leaves, she whispered, "Thank you." 2 words, that was all. But they carried the weight of everything. She couldn't yet say, and Rowan found himself nodding, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in his throat. Outside, the storm had passed, and the mountain was silent in the aftermath. Inside the tower, 3 broken people began, hesitantly, to heal. The first full day passed in a careful dance of silence and small gestures. Nessa woke properly near noon, her body still weak, but her mind sharp with the desperate need to understand where they were and who had saved them. Rowan gave her space, speaking only when necessary, his voice low and carefully neutral. "There's broth on the stove," he said, ladling some into a wooden bowl. "Nothing fancy. Root vegetables, some dried meat. It'll help." Nessa accepted the bowl with trembling hands, her eyes never leaving Finn, who still slept peacefully near the forge. She took a sip, then another, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. It was simple fare, but it had been made with care. She could taste that much. How long? She asked, her voice still rough from the cold. "Found you last night." Storms passed now. Rowan kept his distance, respecting the invisible boundary she'd drawn around herself and her son. "You were nearly frozen. Why did you come out in the storm?" The question hung between them. Rowan paused in his work, his hands stilling on the leather he'd been oiling. He didn't look at her when he answered. "Don't know. Instinct, maybe. Sometimes you just know something's wrong." Nessa studied him in the firelight. He was tall, broad-shouldered from years of forge work, with dark hair that fell past his collar and a beard that hadn't seen a razor in weeks. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, dark and shadowed with old grief that mirrored her own. This was a man who understood loss. "I'm Nessa," she said quietly. "Nessa Thornwood. The boy is Finn, my son, Rowan Blackheart." He finally met her gaze. "This is my home. You're welcome to stay until you're both strong enough to travel. We have nowhere to go." The words escaped before she could stop them, raw and honest. She saw something flicker across Rowan's face, recognition perhaps, or understanding. He nodded slowly. "Then you'll stay until you do." Finn woke an hour later, his eyes bright and curious rather than glazed with cold. He sat up slowly, looking around the tower with wonder, taking in the forge with its glowing coals. The walls hung with tools and half-finished metalwork, the windows that let in streams of winter sunlight. "Mama, are we in a castle?" He whispered. Nessa felt tears prick her eyes. It was the most animated she'd heard him sound in months. "Something like that, little sparrow." Rowan approached carefully, crouching down to the boy's level. "How are you feeling, Finn?" "Warm." Finn smiled, a real smile that made his whole face light up. "I'm actually warm, Mama. Inside warm." "That's good," Rowan said. "You hungry?" "I can make porridge. Fair warning, though, I'm not much of a cook. It might taste like paste." Finn giggled, the sound so unexpected and precious that Nessa had to look away to hide her reaction. "That's okay. Mama's porridge sometimes tastes like paste, too." "Finn." Nessa tried to sound scandalized, but she was smiling. Rowan's laugh was rusty, as if he hadn't used it in a long time. "Well, then, you'll feel right at home." Over the next few days, a rhythm developed. Rowan worked his forge during the mornings, the ring of hammer on anvil becoming a comforting metronome to their healing. Nessa helped where she could, her strength returning slowly. She organized his chaotic collection of dried herbs, identified which ones had medicinal properties and which were simply weeds he'd gathered by mistake. "You know plant craft," Rowan observed one afternoon, watching her work. "I was an herbalist before." She didn't elaborate on what before meant, and he didn't ask. Finn grew stronger each day, the color returning to his cheeks in a way Nessa had feared she'd never see again. But she noticed something troubling. Even with the tower's warmth, even wrapped in blankets, he still experienced episodes where his body temperature would drop suddenly, leaving him shaking and pale. The first time it happened in front of Rowan, Nessa had been preparing lunch. Finn had been playing with some scrap metal pieces, building imaginary structures, when suddenly he went still. His lips began to turn blue. "Finn!" Nessa dropped everything, rushing to him. Rowan was there in an instant. "What's happening?" "I don't know. His body just... it stops keeping itself warm." Her hands shook as she wrapped Finn in more blankets. "It's been happening since his father died. The village healer called it a curse." "It's not a curse," Rowan said firmly. He scooped Finn up and carried him closer to the forge, positioning him where the heat was strongest. Then he disappeared into a back room, returning with a strange contraption made of copper pipes and glass. "What is that?" Nessa asked. "Something I made for before. It's a heating coil, battery-powered." His voice was tight, controlled. "It can provide direct warmth without fire." He wrapped the device carefully around Finn's small body, activating it with a switch. Within minutes, the boy's color began to return. His shivering eased. "Better?" Rowan asked softly. Finn nodded, his eyes wide. "It's like magic. Just metal and wire. But I'm glad it helps." Nessa watched Rowan's careful movements, the way his large, calloused hands were so gentle with her son. "You made this for someone. My wife." The words came out flat, final. "She had circulation problems." got cold easily. I made things to help her stay comfortable. Where is she now? Dead 5 years ago. Fever. The simple statement held volumes of pain. Nessa understood that kind of grief, the way it carved you hollow and left you barely functioning. I'm sorry. So am I. Rowan stood, turning back to his forge. But the device works. Finn can use it whenever he needs it. That night, after Finn had fallen asleep, Nessa found Rowan standing outside the tower, looking up at the star-scattered sky. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and joined him, maintaining a respectful distance. Thank you, she said, for the heating device. For everything. You don't have to keep thanking me. Yes, I do. You saved our lives. You're still saving them. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I couldn't save Helena. Every day since she died, I've wondered what the point was. Why I survived when she didn't. Why I should keep going. Nessa's heart ached for him. And now? Now I think maybe this is why. Maybe I learned all those skills, built all those devices, lived through all that pain so I could be here. So I could find you both in that storm. He finally looked at her, and in the moonlight, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Maybe some things aren't random. Maybe there's a reason for surviving. She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and took his hand. His fingers were warm and strong, scarred from years of forge work. He didn't pull away. My husband Thomas died in a mining accident, she said softly. The same day, Finn's condition started. The village blamed me, said I was cursed, that I was dangerous. My own sister turned her back on me. They exiled us, and I tried to reach Millbrook, tried to find help for Finn, but the storm, ... You nearly died protecting your son. I would have. I was ready to. She squeezed his hand. But then you found us. And Finn is laughing again, Rowan. He's playing and smiling and warm. I'd forgotten what that looked like. They stood together in the cold night air, two damaged people finding unexpected solace in shared grief and newfound purpose. The mountain wind whispered around them, but it no longer felt threatening. You can stay, Rowan said. Both of you. As long as you need. Longer if you want. Why? Nessa turned to face him fully. You don't know us. We're nothing but trouble and burden. You're not a burden. His voice was fierce now, passionate in a way she suspected he hadn't allowed himself to be in years. You're a mother fighting to save her child. You're a survivor. And Finn, that boy has more life in him than I've felt in this tower in 5 years. You've both reminded me what it means to care about something other than just existing. Nessa felt tears sliding down her cheeks, warm against her cold skin. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Let someone help. Let someone in. I've been alone for so long, fighting so hard just to keep us alive. I don't know how to stop fighting. Rowan lifted his free hand slowly, telegraphing the movement, and brushed away her tears with his thumb. The gesture was achingly tender. Then we'll figure it out together. No fighting required. She leaned into his touch, starving for kindness, for connection, for the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could build something new from their broken pieces. Inside the tower, Finn slept peacefully, wrapped in warmth and safety. Outside, under the winter stars, two wounded souls took the first tentative steps toward healing each other. Stay, Rowan whispered. Please stay. And Nessa, who had spent months running with nowhere to run to, finally whispered back, yes. The next morning brought fresh snow and new possibilities. Finn woke to find Rowan teaching him how to work the bellows at the forge, carefully supervised. Nessa organized the tower's cramped kitchen. finding joy in the simple domesticity of preparing meals in a place that felt, against all odds, like it might become home. They ate breakfast together, the three of them, passing bread and jam and weak tea. Finn chattered happily about the metalwork he wanted to learn, about the stories his mother used to tell, about how the tower was definitely a castle, and they were definitely safe now. Rowan caught Nessa's eye across the table, and something passed between them. Understanding, hope, the fragile beginning of something neither of them had expected to find again. Outside, the mountain stood eternal and indifferent. But inside the old watchtower, warmth bloomed like a winter flower, unexpected and precious and worth protecting. And for the first time in 5 years, Rowan Blackheart felt the frozen places in his heart begin, slowly, carefully, to thaw.